Welcome to Taking the High Road, a special show dedicated to the trucking industry, specifically at the confluence of recruiting, retention, and compliance. In the fourth year as the host of this show, I bring over 2 decades of industry experience, both on the carrier side as well as the vendor side. And each week I interview industry experts and thought leaders who bring their insight to the driver lifecycle as we discuss the industry's greatest challenges. I always appreciate your feedback, good or bad. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review. I'd also like to thank and highlight the show's valuable sponsors. Their dedication and commitment to the industry and to the show is greatly appreciated. If you're interested in being a sponsor of the show or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehigherroad.com. Now, this week, I'm honored to be joined by an active and engaged industry leader of many years and third-generation business owner, Ed Nagle III, President and CEO of Nagle Companies. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ed.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Jeremy. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, same here, and I'd love to hear about your background and how you and your family got into trucking. You're quite active in the industry, as I said. Perhaps you can share a bit about the benefits that you see from how involved you are in the industry at so many levels. I'd also love for you to share about Nagle Companies and the various operations of the organization. I'd certainly like to hear your thoughts on how the trucking economy has impacted you and what you believe is in store maybe for the industry in the coming months. And then lastly, we'll answer a question from a listener during our deeper dive segment. Does that work for you?
Perfect.
All right. Well, as you probably know, I generally start every conversation with a book recommendation. Is there anything that you can share with the audience, a book or something that you've read anyway, that's been impactful to you?
You know, most of the books that I've read over the last 20 years have been pretty much centered around my faith. And again, we know the Bible is the most important of all of those that we read a long time ago. But in terms of for business, earlier than that, I read a complete set of books by Philip Crosby, and he was to the service industry what Edward Deming was to manufacturing. It's really about fixing the processes instead of just repairing mistakes, but he applies it to the service industry. And a lot of what he discussed and a lot of the practices that he came up with have been an integral part of my personal life and my professional life. So anything by Philip Crosby it's outdated. He's been dead quite a while, but the philosophies and the practices are very much applicable today.
So Philip Crosby, I wrote that down, and I think kind of to your point, processes and the concept of establishing really good, efficient processes, that's timeless. So I think it's still very relevant today. And in fact, I would argue that in a time like today, probably all the more relevant. You got to be as efficient as possible and whittle out any inefficiencies, especially costly ones. So
absolutely.
So I appreciate that. You know, you and your brother, Pat, both leaders in the organization. You're the president and CEO. I know Pat is the president of the logistics side of the business, I believe. And I know there's a storied history of the generational family business. Can you share a little of the origin story of what is today Nagle Companies?
Yes. Our maternal grandfather, Joe Bugeye, was actually in trucking since World War II. And in 1977, he had contacted my father, who was an engineer for Dana Corporation, asked my dad for a recommendation. My grandfather needed to open a terminal in Toledo. Did my father know anyone? And so my father called him back a week later, said, "Man, I need to give Dana 3 weeks' notice." So I really used that as proof that midlife crises do exist. And no, it was probably the best decision he ever made. So at that point, my mother and father opened a terminal here in Toledo, and that continued till about 1984 when my grandfather closed the company down, pretty much as a result of deregulation. I'd been in the industry since 1978, not for my grandfather. And my father called me up, asked if they started a company, would I be interested? And, you know, the real kicker was I was going to make $25 a week more than I was making at managing a truck stop. So that worked out well. Since that time, later that year, second brother Steve joined the company. A year and a half after that, third brother Pat joined the company. And then following several years after that, the youngest brother Mike joined. that continued on until 1996 or 1997 when our parents decided to retire. I was named president of the company, and they sold their ownership interest to the four of us brothers. Since then, 2008, youngest brother decided to leave the business. That was right during that really bad recession. He basically said, "I'm not having fun. I'm going to look for something else to do." 2016, second brother Steve passed away. And then you had mentioned my brother Pat. So the two of us had been owners, and we just completed the buyout. So Pat is retiring here actually at the end of this month. Yeah.
Wow. Well, congrats to him, first of all. But that's a big burden for you to carry.
Trucking is my DNA. It's not a burden. We have just a tremendous leadership team here now developed, and so I'm more excited about our future now than I probably ever have been.
Well, you mentioned four brothers, right? And so, I'm curious, going back, when did you know that you'd be getting involved in the family business? I mean, was it like it was just part of the DNA and part of the plan, or did you always know it, or was there like some certain catalyst that moved you to really embrace it?
No, actually, there's a little bit of a story there, and I started working at the truck stop when I was 15 years old, and ultimately became the manager of the truck stop. Then in 1984, when my father asked me about starting the business, and I was a dispatcher for a long time. And it was actually at my 10-year reunion, my high school reunion, when I was sitting around with a bunch of guys, and it was a private boys' high school, and so I was there with a doctor and internist, a couple of attorneys, an engineer, and one or two accountants. And by the time they got to me, they said, "What are you at?" I said, "I'm in trucking." And that's when I had this great epiphany, because they turned and looked at me like I hadn't showered in a month. And right away, I told them, "You don't understand. Trucking is the most honorable profession in the world. A truck driver does nothing for themselves. They're doing it for a shipper, for a receiver, for a dispatcher, for a stranger on the road. They don't miss their children's activities because they don't like the activities their children are in. They don't work the holidays because they don't like their families. They make sacrifices every day so that we can have those things for our existence." And so really, trucking is what provides Americans a standard of living. And I take that, back to that, I call it the epiphany of 1990, of when it really came to me. And that's when I became so passionate about this industry, about what this industry provides Americans, and the jobs and the livelihoods that are provided to people.
Well, I love that you said, you don't understand. This is the most honorable position, most honorable, job, industry. I think that's great. And I was thinking that as you were saying that, I was thinking they clearly don't understand. And that's, to be fair, before I got into trucking, I lived in California, a block from the ocean, and I was offered an opportunity to get into trucking in Indiana. And I said, "Indiana, trucking, no thanks." Perspective. I didn't know what I didn't know yet.
And so what I have done since that time, so almost 35 years, I've challenged everybody I know, go back to your home, go back to your office. Back then, everybody didn't have a cell phone with a camera, and I would say, show me something that you have that was not on a truck at one point in time or another, and I'll send you $5. And in almost 35 years, I've not paid out 1 cent. So really, it's about promoting how important our industry is to the American economy and our standard of living.
Well, you do a great job of that, and I want to touch on that in a minute. But before we do you mind sharing with the audience what all Nagle Companies does? Because there's quite a few facets to it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we started out pretty much, we were an agent for a carrier, and shortly thereafter, we started buying our first trucks. And we were really specialized in refrigerated transportation. We serviced the East Coast, and that particular type of trailer gave us more opportunities for backhaul freight. And that's really still a big part of our core competency on the over the road side. But so over the years, logistics has been a big piece of our offerings. We have a maintenance facility here that we also service outside customers. We typically don't live off the emergency road service, but we maintain fleets in this area, kind of operate as their maintenance department. And then we also do a lot on the warehousing side. We built this facility in 2005. So that has grown. And just recently, over the last 5 years, we've gotten more into dedicated transportation. So we stay here within the local region. And that's been probably one of the most fulfilling, because the relationship that you develop with your customers, it is so close. It becomes really more intimate because you depend on each other mutually, and you're less prone to market spikes and shares. So, but as a company, we really try to be that one-stop shopping for our customer. So if they have particular needs, we can provide them a solution, and we're very open book. Here's the cost, cost plus, and we work together to try to help them solve their problems. And that's really the foundation of which our company's been built.
And you're talking about, when you say the region and here and stuff, you're talking about Toledo, right? Toledo,
The
Ohio.
Toledo area, yes.
Yeah, and so some of those customers of yours could be competitors, even in some cases. Is that right? Just at least maybe from a maintenance standpoint or warehousing, perhaps?
No, really, my best friends are my competitors, uh, in this industry. But our customers themselves, I can't think of one left that maintains a private fleet. So no, that's not been an issue with us.
Well, you're super active in the industry, really at all levels, right? You've been a leader for many years in Toledo. I know, very active, foundational part of Toledo Trucking Association, in Ohio Trucking Association, board member, chair, et cetera, national level with TCA, among many others. How important is it to you, that you stay and be so engaged? And then how do you feel that's benefited you personally as well as the company?
I think it's critically important that anybody who is running a company is involved in their outside organizations. Uh, as we were growing up and when it was just the family, our father and the four brothers, and then the other employees, we pretty much operated in a vacuum. And I really think that generation didn't want to open themselves up, possibly, as you're talking about different things, you don't want to give your competitors any secrets or advantages or benefits. But because our industry has become so complex, either from a regulatory standpoint, a legal standpoint, equipment and technology, it's hard to be able to maintain a good knowledge base of all that on your own. So by really opening it out to those in the industry, and as you're talking, we want good competition. And so we've identified certain problems that we've either experienced and then somebody else has had a solution for, or vice versa. And so it makes it a lot easier to continue to learn, because this industry is constantly changing. And I mean, it's such a more rapid pace than anything that I had personally experienced in the first 30 years. And so that's really the only way you can keep up on this, and especially from the regulatory standpoint. But I think of equal, if not greater importance to a lot of that, is the legislative affairs component of what we do. And if there's anybody that's listening to this program who personally does not know their city councilman or their county commissioner or their mayor, their state rep, their congressperson or their senator, you're missing the boat, because it's really, really important. Number one, they work for you. Our taxes pay for their salaries. But if they don't know you and your opinions on things, it's very difficult for them to take actions that are important to either your industry or so forth. And in my case, I've never advocated personally for anything, for Ed Nagle. It's always been on behalf of the industry. And so this way, it gives a lot more credibility to the conversation. All these different elected officials, whether it's local all the way to Washington, D.C., they can't know everything about everything. And so we know what issues are critically important to our industry, and it's important that we are able to convey that to them and also to help bring solutions. And so, through lobbying efforts or the relationships that we build with our elected officials, they then can either introduce legislation, or if legislation is introduced, that they can now make a good common sense decision on whether to support it or not. So that's been really effective. And that environment, again, changes just like technology. Things are always coming at you. I call trucking the perpetual whack-a-mole game. And so you really have to stay on top of everything at all times. And so through these industry associations, it makes it a lot easier to convey those things to elected officials, as well, like I said, to have those resources available to help you more effectively manage your own companies.
Well, you made a really good point about the importance of on the legislative front, and I know, and I've heard this. I've done this a ton of times. Going to especially to DC, calling Washington, and those sorts of events, which are great. Not only is it to get in front of your elected officials and make sure that you're communicating to them the things that are important to you. Sometimes it's to protect your industry, or it's to promote, and endorse certain things that you're trying to get happen. But to your point, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu oftentimes. And so it's really important to get involved and to communicate.
And the elected officials a lot of times will give the voter or the industry person a lot more credibility than a lobbyist. They may not believe what they're saying, but they're being paid to say it. So hearing from the practitioner is a lot more important in many instances than hearing from third-party individuals or organizations.
Yeah, well, you're their constituent, so they want to hear from you, and probably, hopefully, a supporter, especially if they're listening to you, and at least you feel that they're supportive of your cause, your needs. From a business standpoint, as well as a leader in the organization, what is it, would you say, that sets you apart in an otherwise competitive environment? You did say that a lot of your competitors are your good friends. What
Right.
is it? What is it about you? What is it about Nagle companies that does set you apart, though? There's a lot of trucking companies out there, and there's some that I think are sus, I would say. Maybe not on the up and up. I know that's not you. I know what matters to you. You mentioned faith earlier. I know you have some really strong core values. Can you share kind of what some of those things are?
Well, our business is really worked and built on honesty, integrity, respect, and so our relationships with our customers were very transparent, and so we're very flexible. Unlike the larger carriers, if they come into a customer and they can provide this incredible pricing, but that customer, in order to obtain that pricing, has to do business the way the big carriers are. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but for other customers who may have more distinct shipping needs, once you become really engaged with that customer and you learn what those are, then you tailor a solution that is what they're looking for. So that flexibility and that ability to kind of bob and weave based on what their needs are, because that those change all the time as well. So that's really, I think, what we offer. As a smaller company, we don't have the ability to compete from a size standpoint, but the relationship that we build, we really do that. I've used this word before, the intimate knowledge back and forth. And that's really been a big part of our success. And so, we try to provide a service that, again, at our size, we can't compete on a price basis, but that they derive quality from the service that we provide. And that's really been our guiding principles. Treating the customers with respect and dignity built, by hard work. It's worked.
It's a partnership, right? It's a relationship. And, back to some of the issues that we were talking about, certainly on the legislative front, but just in general, in your opinion, what are maybe the one or two greatest challenges that the industry is facing today?
If we take the economy out of it, because we know we're in a freight recession, I think we're probably 30 months in or better. I don't think we can get any true economist or any politician to, actually define what that is. But
it's always 6 months out, right? Recovery is always 6 months out.
Exactly. So I mean, we've been in that, and so you take that aside. Probably one of our biggest challenges is with this emissions and fuel technology. They really want to push this whole EV thing, the electric and so forth, and we don't have an infrastructure to support that. So we as the consumer of those products, the trucks and trailers and the engines and so forth, we're kind of left in a lurch. Because, how do we look at investing capital in the long range? So that's been a challenge. And so as adamant as some of the politicians are about taking a particular path, when you get to the practitioners, their answers are a little bit different, sort of different. So that's tougher and tougher to navigate. The other thing is workforce. And people can argue back and forth about whether there's a driver shortage or not, but in general, good drivers, we can hire people to fill the seats all day long, but the characteristics of a true truck driver, it is very difficult to find those. And I tell people, even all of our new employees, that I've been around trucking my entire life, and I know what those nights of the road were. And I'm sadly disappointed about the truck drivers today. But I can say that about any other career or any other position out there. So it doesn't matter, though, that the way that a driver today dresses or looks like or behaves, those core values of what a professional truck driver are still remain true. And so it's really it's difficult trying to find, the drivers today that really emulate and take pride and own their position and their career, their chosen path. Drivers. We also have technicians. Skilled trades are terribly in short demand, and so many people, they don't want to work with their hands. They'd rather do some electronic media as a way of making money. But even, with the low unemployment, finding general office staff, it can be difficult. So we've been in a fortunate position with respect to the general office that we're an environment that people like to come to work for. So we haven't had turnover there. Our mechanics really haven't had a lot of turnover there. Our drivers, our over-the-road drivers, we have an average tenure of 17 years. So there's not a lot of turnover there. We lose drivers to either retirement or injury or illness, rather than, they're just not happy here. So, but it's very, very difficult to recruit. We have such high standards, especially for drivers and mechanics, that we make it a greater challenge to ourselves. But because we're so dedicated to this industry, we're not going to take any shortcuts. So we really try to maintain those higher standards. So I would say between the economy staying, we'll leave that alone. The emissions, regulations, and workforce are probably two of the greatest challenges.
Yeah, and I think most would agree with that, and I think it's a testament to your culture that you have the tenure that you have, and you don't have some of the challenges. There are companies that are really hurting and certainly around from a workforce standpoint. Um, you know, while we do have time for a final question, and this is the deeper dive segment where we take a question from one of our listeners. And today's deeper dive question is brought to you by Career Now Brands. And the deeper dive question is it just me, or does this downturn seem worse than the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009? So before you answer that, I've heard this question quite a bit, honestly, in at least the last year or more. I was sort of dismissive of it at first, like, oh, I remember those days. It was rough. I don't know. I'm getting a mixed bag of responses, generally speaking now. What are your thoughts on, is this worse than that era?
I think it's very similar. And the difference really is there's two differences. One, this may become more extended, and we're in an election year, so that's really going to drive what the future of our economy is going to look like here at the end of the year and the next couple of years. But the difference is 2007, and it was 2007 to 2010, really for us, was we were kind of caught off guard. Thankfully for here, we had a couple of good years during those COVID years because we were an essential industry that our financial health going into the period we're in now, what was much better. So we're able to withstand this. I don't want to say easier, but with a little bit more strength than we were able to in 2007. I think we were all a little bit surprised that came as quickly as it did.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think being a responsible steward of that success that you had on the front end sort of gives you that, that strength, that support to get through this period. Whereas I'm sure there are plenty of companies who maybe leaned in a little too much when all of a sudden the floor gave way here in the last, couple of years, as you said, approaching 30 months. It's been a long time. I think the pendulum swung real far one way, and now it's come back, aggressive. And I hope that we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. We keep wanting to believe that is true. And I think the worst is behind us. I hope it seems to be the case.
I hope so as well. And many of us who went through that period, 2007, 2010, vowed never to get our companies in a position like that again. So we made our companies healthier through the last several good years in anticipation that it could repeat itself. And thankfully, that was the best education that we could have received.
Yep. Yeah. Costly at the time, but still valuable education. First of all, thank you so much for joining me, Ed. I really appreciate your passion, your dedication, and I always enjoy seeing you at industry events.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you very much for having me.
And thanks for joining me for another episode of Taking the Higher Road. Stay tuned for the next episode as I'm joined by Chad Crotty, VP of Sales for DDC FPO. Once again, special thanks to the sponsors of this show. We really appreciate you. If you're interested in being a sponsor or joining me for an interview, please email Jeremy at takingthehigherroad.com. Until next time, thank you for taking the higher road.